Hello guys, I'm back from another video, and today we're talking about what if Deku had quirk creation redo. So, in the last video we talked about how, after Izuku's, time during, in the training camp, basically mostly, training, obviously, as Class 1B finally arrives to basically, do the test of courage, as everybody's basically, excited to do this, as Izuku and also, Momo were paired up together to go into the forest. While they were there, they were just like, going to the forest, as when the, Class 1B students basically tried to, scare them, well, Izuku was not scared at all, including, Momo. But when they were about to be, when they were basically alone in the forest, they would start to, have a passionate, make-out session. But unknown to them, a few people were watching them, specifically Ibara and Setsuna. Setsuna was basically recording all of this because she wants to have some, blackmail material. And as for Ibara, she was basically saying, it's sinful, things of that sort. And after a while of basically, having a bit of fun, meanwhile, the League of Villains have finally arrived, and their new leader, Bakugo, basically now having the quirk All for One, stolen the quirk of Muscular, and decided to, terrorize the, the training camp, so he can get revenge on Izuku. So, when, Bakugo finally arrives there, he would basically, tell everybody to basically, go into the forest and basically kill some of the students. And for Bakugo, he wants to kill Izuku all by himself. So, when Izuku basically, was done basically making out with her, well, Bakugo would finally arrive there and started fighting Izuku. Izuku would tell everybody to basically get out there, including, Ibara and also, wait for a second, Setsuna, because Izuku, both of them already, decided to just pretend that they didn't saw anything, like they didn't see anything, so Izuku would basically tell both of them to basically get out there, as Izuku would start fighting him. After a while fighting him, well, one of them specifically, Ibara, would see that Izuku was using a different quirk. She basically wanted to ask, but Izuku would basically tell her his whole secret, except for, the whole, him being a villain part, or used to be a villain. So yeah, both of them were shocked, except for, you probably know her, aka, wait for a second, Momo, because remember, she is technically married to him, or at least soon to be married to him, because, after, hearing about his, old self, specifically when he was still Moriarty, well, she already knows about his, his quirk creation quirk. So, after escaping there with, Ibara and Setsuna, Izuku would start fighting, Bakugo at his full strength. And when Bakugo tried to, steal his quirk away, it did work. And so Izuku decides to use his, a much more powerful quirk, which he calls Cancel. It was meant to be used for, for All for One, as Izuku would activate it as Bakugo's All for One quirk would be nullified. What do I mean by this? Well, he can't really use it anymore. And when Bakugo was enraged, he would decide to use both of his quirks, specifically, Muscular's quirk, which is the muscle fiber quirk, and his actual quirk, specifically, wait for a second, specifically Explosion, as he would try to, create a large explosion right at him, as Izuku would basically push him back, as he would create his own explosion using his, perfect explosion quirk. As he would say, his special move, Sarbomba, as a large explosion would basically destroy the, half of the, half of the forest, causing some of the mountains to have a large crater. Not really a crater, more like a literal valley now between them. Bakugo's body would be, half destroyed, as Bakugo would tell Dabi to basically, tell everybody to basically get out of there, more specifically, the rest of the League of Villains. After teleporting away, Izuku would come back, seeing every single, student, finally hearing about, Izuku's secret. Well, they were in shock, as one of them would basically say this, specifically, Aizawa, asking why did he hide his quirk, and so explains everything, including how you used to be a villain. And we basically ended it off there. So yeah, so that is basically what happened last episode, and so let's talk about what happens next. So after explaining his whole, past to everybody, including, to Izumi, everybody was in shock, as one of them would say this, specifically Kirishima. So you became a villain because, as Izuku would say this, yeah, everybody thought that it was weak. But when I activated or unlocked my quirk, everybody started flocking to me, thinking that they can, wait for a second, thinking that if they apologize to me, they can get a new quirk, or even get multiple quirks. But unfortunately, it's freaking life. It doesn't mean that I'll give you anything just because you apologize. So no. And that is why I became a villain. To show everybody that those that you bully will become strong. And those people will get their revenge. They will fester and rot with their rage and their grudges. After saying that, everybody was in shock, as Izuku would calm down. Yeah, that is why he became a villain. But I became tired of it, so I decided to pretend, or at least, somewhat pretend that I quote-unquote died. As everybody would just say, really? As Izuku would say this, yeah. That is why I decided to become a hero, so I can right these wrongs. And maybe just because, or wait for a second, or maybe decide to just be a normal hero. No longer a villain. I just want to save people this time now. I no longer want to become the monster, the villain in the story. I want to be the hero this time. As everybody would just be in shock, as, one of them specifically, Aizawa, would basically come up to him, as he would say this. I'll forgive you, Izuku. As Izuku would say this. Wait, really? As he would say this. Yes. Because you saved everybody. You saved all of us from Bakugo. As one of them would say this, specifically, specifically Mina, as Mina would say this. Yeah, you basically saved us. Bakugo was about to kill us, so, as Izuku would say this. Guys, thank you. As Izuku would start tearing up, as one of them would say this. Hey, Izuku, you don't need to cry. As Izuku would say this. I'm just so happy that all of you are my friends. He would basically smile. As, wait for a second, goddammit. As one of them, specifically Vlad King, said this. Alright, enough with this sentimental bullshit. What are we going to do with Bakugo? As Izuku would say this. Maybe tell the Hero Commission. And maybe even tell All Might about it. Maybe tell everybody that it's time for us to take down that damn villain all for one. Everybody would just be in shock hearing this, as one of them would say this, specifically Aizawa. Izuku, are you crazy? Even though you're strong, it doesn't mean that, as Izuku would say this, I fought against him once. As everybody would just be in shock, as Izuku would say this. I have this special quirk that I specially made for All For One. I call it Full Council. When I use it, I'm able to nullify a quirk forever, basically destroying the quirk and causing them to basically become quirkless, essentially. As everybody would just be in shock hearing this, as, one of them specifically, Aizawa would say this. That sounds, as Izuku would say this, yeah. Overpowered, I know. But, remember, my quirk allows me to cancel out a person's abilities, or create any quirk that I desire. So I can obviously make, for say, a quirk that can destroy the world, for say, or even save the world. So, and I promise you, I will become a hero, and no longer a villain. And I will protect everybody. I consider you all as like family and friends. As everybody would start to, cry a little bit, as one of them specifically, Kirishima would say this. That's so manly, dude. As Izuku would say this. Yeah, it is manly. So, as everybody's basically, getting ready to leave, the, training camp, Izuku would start to leave with, Class 1A. So, when they got back to the dorms, they would basically explain the whole situation, to All Might and everyone in the, UA staff, including about Izuku's real quirk. Everybody was just, in shock after hearing his actual quirk. All Might was in shock knowing that he was, Moriarty, the #1 villain of England, and it turns out that he decided to become a hero because he wants to decides to become a hero because he was done being a villain. He wants to be the hero of the story. So, All Might would basically come up to him, and All Might would basically forgive him for basically, causing a bit of trouble during in England, and also, causing several, tragedies. Izuku would just say that he was disappointed in himself. If he were to have the ability, he can technically go into the past thanks to his, his quirk, but if he were to, go into the past and basically say anything to his past self, he wants to say that he wants to become a hero, and tells him to go into the right path. So All Might was in shock hearing this, and told him that he's going to be a great hero one day, maybe even becoming the #1 hero. So, All Might would basically, tell everybody, including some heroes from, around the, Japanese, continent, to basically get ready because they're taking a last stand against All for One, including, and also Bakugo, technically. So, everybody was basically, getting ready for the final battle. Class 1A, Class 1B, the top 10 heroes of Japan, everybody is basically getting ready. The League of Villains are also getting ready, as Bakugo can't even use All for One anymore. When All for One heard of this, let's just say All for One was pissed, as he wants to get revenge on, Moriarty, for basically humiliating him last time. So, he wants to bring in a special item of his. I guess you can say a performance-enhancing drug, to make him, less vulnerable in battles. Because he still has the scar, he needs to take drugs to basically, how do I say this? To keep him in tip-top shape. So, he would use a special drug made by the doctor, I can't remember his freaking name, that will help him in his, endeavors. Not Endeavor, as in the #1 hero, #1 hero, I meant the, #2 hero of Japan, not that guy. So, after basically getting his drugs and basically chugging it all down, he would get ready, as he would assemble some of his troops, which were mostly Nomu and low-level, villains. And as for Bakugo, he was pissed, and he wants to take revenge on Izuku. So, because half of his body was burned, he would decide to enhance his body by using prosthetic limbs, thanks to the help of, the doctor. And so, he was fully ready to get his revenge on Izuku for burning his face, and also, destroying half of his body. So, let's go back to Izuku and Class 1A, Class 1... You'll basically get it. So, Izuku is currently on one of those, large fighter jets that that contain, several people, as Izuku is basically sitting right next to, wait for a second. He was basically right beside Momo, as Momo was basically worried, as Izuku would say this. Don't worry, Momo. I got some ideas for you. As Izuku would basically whisper in her ear, as she would say this. Izuku. As Izuku would say this. Yeah. As Izuku would give her, quirks. As when she does, get these quirks, these quirks were pretty much powerful. One is super regeneration, which allows her to basically, regenerate from, let's just say, from one atom that's basically from her DNA. Let's just say that. It's basically Deadpool's quirk, or ability to basically regenerate, but 10 times as that. So yeah, and then there's her other quirk, which is called Elementalist, which allows her to control many different elements, like for example, water, fire, wind, earth, metal, electricity, darkness, light, things of that sort. And finally, there's her final quirk, which is basically a quirk that allows her to basically create objects, basically similar to, her basically similar to, her, creation quirk, but, well, it's stronger because it doesn't really mean anything. Like for example, like her, body fat or anything of that sort, it's basically nothing. It allows her to basically create anything from nothing. Like for example, if she wants to say make a tank, she can make it out of thin air. So yeah. So Izuku would also give other quirks to, his other, compatriots in this battle, mostly giving them, enhanced strength, enhanced healing, blah blah blah. And for All Might, Izuku would heal his, wound, allowing him to basically be at basically prime at that point now. So, All Might is fully ready. He doesn't have that, weakness of his, which is, the large scar, as everybody's fully ready, getting ready for this final battle. So, Izuku would basically tell everybody to get ready, as everybody's basically activating their quirks. Izuku and, the planes would basically start, fly above the, island where, the League of Villains are basically staying in, as everybody would jump off the plane. Some of the heroes would basically activate their quirks to, negate the, fall damage, as Izuku would basically, doesn't really use a parachute all that much, but instead, he would just use the shadows around him, which is basically night right now. He would basically use the darkness around him to basically teleport himself, similar to Hiraishin from, Naruto. So, after arriving down to the ground, he would see that, wait for a second. He would see Momo basically, going down from the sky, basically, using her, using her and brand newly required, I meant her newly acquired, quirk, specifically, Elementalist, which she starts using the, air manipulation from that, part of the quirk to allow her to basically float down to the ground safely. As everybody's getting ready, they would see several Nomus fully at the ready, and several, thugs, or, like low-level thugs, as they would see right in front of those thugs was All For One, and also Bakko, as Bakko would say this: "Time to take down those damn extras!" As for, All For One, he would say this: "Yes, my good... Well, wait for a sec. Yes, my apprentice. You may destroy these damn extras." As he would start charging in with his explosions, as he would start to go towards, Izuku, as Izuku would block the attack with his sword, as every single hero would start charging in with their, brand newly acquired quirks, including All Might. All Might would start fighting at full capacity, thanks to, the healing, factor of his, brand newly, acquired quirk. As All Might would see All For One, as both of them would start fighting. Izumi, meanwhile, was basically, fighting off some of the Nobus, including Class 1A and Class 1B, blah blah blah. As Izuku was fighting Bakko, Bakko would say this: "Take this!" As Bakko would start, using his, muscle fibers to create a large spear. As Izuku would start, fight with it, Izuku would basically, cut off a piece of that, that muscle fiber, as he would scream out, "The hell? That hurt!" As Izuku would say this: "That's supposed to be the point." As Izuku would basically start, activating Beowulf, as his body would start to shift and peel, as he would start becoming that gigantic monster. More specifically, he starts to gain, that large, terrifying mask, and that large horn, as his skin would become, this, almost pulsing with power, as Izuku would basically use his summoning quirk to summon, a large King Ghidorah. Yes, that King Ghidorah from goddamn, Toei, or, the, Godzilla universe. So, this large Ghidorah, which is about the size of, 10 buildings, would basically, look at Bakugo as Izuku would say this, "Let's do this." As the King Ghidorah would shoot out lightning, Bakugo would basically, take the brunt of the attack, thanks to his, newly acquired, well, prosthetic arm and leg, as he would basically start charging in at Izuku, as Izuku would start fighting him once again. The King Ghidorah would basically start fighting, Izuku, not really Izuku, I meant fighting with Izuku against Bakugo. The fight was basically chaotic at this point, as several news helicopters got word of this, as they would see all of these heroes and heroes in training basically fighting against, these villains, as everybody is basically looking at one thing: Izuku and the large King Ghidorah that was basically, fighting with him. Fighting against this villain, New 0 for 1, or, Neo 0 for 1 as he prefers to call himself. As Bakugo would start, wait for a second, start, using, explosion after explosion, as Izuku would basically take the brunt of the attack from his, from his hardening quirk. As Izuku would punch him once again, as he would grab his sword, as he would say this, "Let's try this out." As Izuku would basically twist the handle, as these wrappings would start to, undo themselves. As he would basically, twist the, handle, as it would open up, showing a weird looking red ball. As he would say this, "Now, I will show you true pain." As he would basically scream out, "Pal Mog!" As he would basically slash as a large, blast of blue energy, now turning into red, as it would slam into Bakugo. Bakugo's, prosthetic arm and leg basically disintegrated, as Bakugo would scream out, "The hell!" As Bakugo would basically, look at, Izuku, as he would start, screaming out, You! As he would start using the muscle fibers to create, I guess you could say kind of prosthetic arms and legs, as he would basically charge in once again, as Izuku would start using his, sword once again. As the people were watching this, everybody was watching this. Everybody was just like impressed seeing this kid fighting against this new threat against, Hero Society. Heroes around the world were watching him and cheering him on. All for One was shortly defeated by, All Might, as All Might is basically there watching Izuku, as the rest of the villains were basically captured. Everybody was watching Izuku and Neo All for One basically fighting against each other, as Izuku is basically, pummeling him, as Bakugo would not care, saying, "I will not lose, I'll become the #1 hero!" As Izuku would say this, "We're like the #1 fucking tyrant," as Izuku would basically create 2 dark swords from the sky, as he would basically tell them to basically, charge at Bakugo. These swords would basically start, slicing through Bakugo like butter, as Bakugo's, wait for a second, muscle fiber based, arm and leg were basically blocking some of these attacks. But one little misstep, he accidentally fell on his, ass for some odd reason. Well, Izuku accidentally, putting in a rock, let's just say that, as this sword would basically cut off his, newly acquired arm, as he would scream out once again, as blood is basically rushing out of there, as Bakugo screams out, "I will kill you, you damn extra!" As he would scream out, "You ruined my life!" As he would scream out, "I will not lose!" As he would start using his, explosion quirk once again, creating more explosions, as Izuku would scream out this once again. Wait for a second. As Izuku would scream out, "Take this!" As a portal would basically, appear right below him, as a large monster would basically come out of there, resembling the... Wait for a second. I probably might, mispronounce this, but I think it was called, Keizu, which is that weird-ass monster, whatever the fuck that thing is. It's basically a monster from Monster Hunter, but when I first saw the thing, what the fuck? It looks like a worm with a dragon body, and the texture on its skin. So, it would basically, swallow Bakugo whole, as he would basically, tell the, well, the King Ghidorah to basically eat that, well, wait for a sec, that Keizu. As after eating it, Baku would burst out of the, burst out of the King Ghidorah once again, as Bakugo would scream out, "You will not win! I'm supposed to be the winner of this story. I'm gonna be the hero, and nobody is gonna stop me!" As his eyes would almost seem almost say like, how do I say this? Almost psychotic, as he seems to be, well, doing that whole anime thing, where like the bad guy is almost like he's about to lose, like one of those like overconfident guys from anime, and basically like that he's about to lose and he's not believing that he's going to lose. He's basically one of those guys, as he would basically charging at Izuku, as he would scream out, "Take this!" As he would basically create a large explosion on his face, creating this large plume of dust. After that plume of dust, he would see, everybody would basically see Izuku grabbing Bakugo by the neck, as Izuku would scream out this, "Full council." As he would basically cancel out Bakugo's original quirk, which is explosion, and Muscular's quirk. Bakugo, after, getting that attack, Bakugo would try to, use his explosions, but it didn't work. Bakugo would say, "What the hell? What did you do to my quirk?" As Izuku would say this, "Well, isn't that obvious? I turned you quirkless." Bakugo was in disbelief, as Bakugo would scream out, you, as he would basically get ready to, do another, attack, getting ready to, slam his, fist into, Izuku's face, as Izuku's face would basically harden, as Bakugo's arm, or at least his, remaining arm, would be gone. Bakugo would fall onto the ground, because, he can't use his muscle fiber quirk. Now he's basically just like, just has one leg and one arm. After this battle, the heroes won. Bakugo was sent to Tartarus, becoming the worst villain ever. He was sent to the lowest parts of, Tartarus for basically causing all of these, events to happen. Bakugo was deemed as a villain. Bakugo was pissed after that. And so, Izuku and everybody would celebrate knowing that the number one villain, all for one, is gone. So, this is going to be the end of this series, but before you leave, let's talk about the epilogue, shall we? So, in the epilogue, Izuku now has children with, Momo, and Izuku, not technically Izuku, it's more like Momo. Momo is now the, the CEO of her, mother and father's company. As both of these children that they gotten, well, they basically have both the same quirks, basically a mix of both of their quirks, specifically from Izuku and also Momo, and they're quite overpowered and deemed as, prodigies. Izuku became the number one hero, while Momo was the number two hero. So, everybody was basically, pretty much happy about this, as Izuku would rediscover his actual family, after, a bit of, trial and error, and also a blood, and after a DNA test, it turns out that Izuku was the half-brother of Izumi. Oh, what a surprise! Whatever. So, after meeting up with his, mother, Inko, or at least his, I guess you can say, like, half-mother, I guess, Inko, she would be happy knowing that she has a kind of son, and she would basically gladly, treat her, I guess you can say, half-grandchildren as, a part of the family. As for Izumi, Izumi would basically marry freaking Todoroki, and Todoroki and, her basically get children, and these children would basically, be friends with, Izuku and Momo's children. And so, everybody has a pretty good life. and everybody was basically, happy. Except for Bakugo. Bakugo is currently in, Tartarus, basically suffering for all of his sins. Bakugo was pretty much pissed and, wants to get revenge, but unfortunately he's never coming back to the surface. Ever. Thankfully. I mean, he's literally doesn't have a quirk anymore. So, yeah. So, this is going to be the true ending of this, series. So, yeah. So, I hope you like this series, and I hope you like the video. Comment and subscribe, and I hope to see you guys next time. Bye-bye!